if I have to have several drinks just to go talk to somebody that I want to talk to, like clearly I have some insecurities. And if I have those insecurities and I need to do certain things to look a certain way and present a certain way to a woman that I'm interested in, it's almost like the power dynamic is shifted in the wrong way.
So you teach naming your anxiety. Why is labeling emotions so powerful for breaking the mental loop?
It's okay. I understand. I love you. I accept you. We've been through a lot. We're going to keep going. That's like that. Those are the messages, the soulful messages that you really need to send to yourself, and the ones that are going to help you get through all this.
So even though the experience and the pain was bad, the pain and or the experience is what gave you the wisdom. So you must still be thankful for that person or that experience, because now you have wisdom that you can share with someone else, or you can apply in your life to not make the same mistake that you made in the past. Hey Conscious Man 7 family, quick question before we start. Do you love the depth of these conversations but hate when ads break the flow? I get it. Ads can feel like speed bumps on a highway, pulling you out of that deep zone. That's why we created a way for you to enjoy every episode completely ad-free while supporting the show at the same time. For just a few bucks a month on Patreon or Locals, you'll get full access to uninterrupted episodes. You'll get direct access to me so you can ask me any questions that you have, some cool other perks like early releases, and you'll also help us keep bringing you the powerful conversations that mainstream platforms won't touch. The link is in the show notes. Join us there and be part of this movement. Ever look up and see those dull, gray skies streaked with chemtrails, and you feel your energy sink? You're not imagining it. Something in you knows the sky isn't supposed to look that way. But what if you could bring back the blue? What if there was a way to clear the air inside you and above you? That's where the Chembo comes in. They create powerful orgonite, tools that generate orgone energy, the life force that helps neutralize EMFs from your mobile phone, your Wi-Fi, and even 5G. It's nature's way of restoring balance, bringing cleaner air, calmer energy, and deeper sleep. Every piece from the Chembo is handmade, from tactical tower busters to beautiful pyramids and jewelry, crafted with the precise ingredients to generate real orgone energy. And here's the best part. They've proven it. For over 10 years, they've cleared thousands of miles of chemtrails, bringing the blue back to the skies around the world. So if you're ready to take back your weather and your well-being, go to thechembo.com. Use coupon code CM7 for 10% off and experience the shift for yourself. Don't fear the chemtrails or the EMF. Be empowered with the Chembo and never feel helpless again. If you are new to this podcast, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share, because that helps us to be recommended in the algorithms. If you would like to support this podcast, please check out our merch store on Amazon with the brand Todd and Me. We've got some cool t-shirts, tank tops, hoodies, and sweaters. Link will be in the description of this podcast. And if you're now starting a spiritual journey, you would like to start a spiritual journey, or you're currently on a spiritual journey and you would like some help removing some fears and traumas, please hit me up on my Instagram at Adriano_246 and it will help you to get some magic mushrooms. Enjoy the show and stay tuned, because we have some more great content coming soon. Most men don't talk about it. They talk about business, they talk about goals, they talk about winning. But when the noise stops and it's just them and their thoughts, a different story plays. The real war isn't out there, it's in here. That voice that won't shut off, that heaviness that makes you question your purpose, the anxiety that hijacks your focus, the depression that creeps in even when life looks good on paper. Hello friends, welcome to the Conscious Man 7 podcast. I am your host Todd Cave. My guest today, Brian Sachetta, knows that world inside out. He's the author of the powerful book series Get Out of Your Head, a blueprint for men and women who want to stop being prisoners of their own thoughts and finally reclaim clarity, purpose, and peace. What makes Brian's work different is this. He doesn't just talk about managing anxiety, he talks about transforming it, turning fear into fuel, pain into wisdom. Today, we're diving deep into his 10-step framework for breaking the cycles of anxiety and depression exploring why so many high-achieving men silently suffer, and uncovering how mastering your mind is actually the first step to spiritual awakening. So if you've ever felt trapped in your own head, if you've ever smiled for the world but felt empty inside, this conversation might be the wake-up call your soul's been waiting for to help you break that mental prison wide open.
When truth is blurred by lies and misinformation, perception becomes reality. What will you perceive your reality to be?
Liberate your fears and walk with me.
Sit down and meditate. Connect with your soul.
Be a monster and then learn how to control it.
You got to be willing to do the work.
So it really goes really deep in terms of words and etymology and what they mean. So this is why like it is really hard to really crack the matrix, because there's so many levels and layers to it, you know? Brian, welcome to the Conscious Man 7 podcast. How are you today, fella?
Thanks, Todd. I'm doing well. How you doing?
I am doing very well. And I'm really interested to talk to you today because as we were talking off camera, it seems like there is a bit of a resurgence in like consciousness of men, and men are starting to like wake up and realize that actually we have a very important role to play in the society, and you know we've lost our way, and it's time for us to get back to being who we are and who we were, because our society has become very feminine over the last few decades, and that consciousness has basically emasculated men, and men sort of are not men anymore. So, you know, I think conversations like these are very important and very timely, because we're actually having an awakening of consciousness of humanity, and men make up half the population. So, you know, conversations like this are very important to, you know, touch, move, and inspire men to get back on their bike and to get back doing the jobs that men used to do, which are protecting and providing. But there are obviously some nuances in there where we have all the prison, the prison that we built in our mind, and we do a lot of suffering as men, and we suffer in silence. So, you know, I wanted to delve into, you know, some of the things that you teach and talk about your book and stuff like that. So let's dive right in. So you've said anxiety and depression once ruled your life. What was the turning point that made you decide, I'm going to understand and defeat this thing for real?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I do want to be honest and say, I don't know if there was one moment in time. There were probably a handful of them, but I'm happy to talk about a bunch of them, a couple of them, whatever. So the story that I usually talk about is when I went off to college, I knew that I had been dealing with nervousness, panic attacks, anxiety for a long time. I just didn't know the exact words to use. So I come from a family that is not, we're not doctors or anything like that. My parents are wonderful people. They are not practitioners. They come from the accounting world, the finance world, that sort of thing. And we didn't talk too much about mental health and anxiety and our emotions and whatnot growing up. And that, I think that's, customary for a lot of families, especially, I grew up in the 90s. And so things have changed a lot since, where now in the public eye and on social media and whatnot, the conversation around mental health has grown a lot. But back then it was kind of one of those things, right? You just didn't talk about. So in high school, I dealt with a lot of anxiety, a lot of nervousness. Again, didn't exactly have the lexicon for that. So I'd just be like, oh, I have a math exam. I have a basketball game. I have a track meet. I'm nervous. But I didn't really know, this thing called anxiety. I didn't know what a panic attack was and whatnot. During my senior year of high school, I went on a date with this girl that I had kind of been seeing. It wasn't an official relationship, but we had gone on a few dates, and it wasn't going great. So I started to get nervous about it. And, long story short, there was on this date, I had a panic attack in front of this woman. It really rattled me, but I had no idea. I had no idea how to handle it in the moment. I had no idea how to handle it afterward. I still didn't know what a panic attack was. I just said to myself, I went on this date. It went so horribly. I was so wildly nervous, the most nervous I've ever been. My heart was racing out of my chest. I couldn't think. I could barely breathe, all of that, right? And being 18 and it being, the late early aughts, let's say, if I can even use that term, I just kind of, as an 18-year-old in this environment where culturally nobody talked about this stuff, part of me was like, I got to go figure out what that was. And part of me was also like, just push it down, forget about it, don't worry about it, that kind of thing. So anyways, the story that I really was going to talk about that I alluded to was 6 months later, I go off to college and, the optimist in me says, hey, we're going to this new start. Let's put the nervousness behind us. Let's make some new friends. Let's meet some new women, get into a relationship, what have you. And so I meet this girl at college. It's the second or third week of college, probably the second. And, we had hung out a couple times before, like she was in one of my classes or whatever, and our friends were all friends together and whatnot. So this Friday night, and she texts me, and I can tell just by the text messages like that she had been drinking a little bit. People have their tells, right? And I had not. And this is not one of those stories where anybody was trying to take advantage of anyone. This was me. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so nervous. Here comes this person who I'm interested in. It seems like she's interested in me, but the last time that I tried to do something like this, I had a panic attack and it went so horribly, right? So anyway, she comes over a few minutes later. Long story short here, I have a panic attack in front of her like right away, and she senses it. And so I was walking through the hallways of my dorm trying to catch my breath or settle myself or whatever, and she emerges from the stairwell. And so I'm walking by this little study lounge in the hallway, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm really nervous. Let me try to act cool, play cool, sit down on this little chair behind me in the study lounge and pretend like nothing's wrong. So I do that, and immediately, because she's a little animated and has had a couple drinks, jumps into my lap and just right away feels my heart racing and my body kind of shaking. And she freaks out and she calls me a bunch of names and she's running away and all that. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, here we go again. This is heartbreaking. This is horrible. I don't even have a term for what this thing is. And yet I'm dealing with another one of them, the term or the thing being a panic attack. So I wake up the next day and I say to myself, that's two of those events in a row. I still don't exactly know what they are. I still don't exactly know how to deal with them, or I have no idea how to deal with them, let's say. But that was my first moment ever where I said to myself, I have to figure this thing out, because this is getting in the way of me trying to date women and trying to have a romantic life. And it's just not working, right? So I sat down at my computer the next day, and that was really where, if I think of the journey being like a movie, right? I'm like, that's where the movie pretty much begins. I'm at my desk in a cold sweat being like, how am I going to fix this? What is going on inside my mind? What is wrong with me? And that was really where I started, trying to figure out what this thing was, trying to figure out how to deal with it. That was the first line in the sand or moment in time where I was just like, I have to do something about this. There are some other ones as well, for sure. But let me just pause there and see how that lands.
Wow, that is levels, because I can say for sure that as a young man, when you go to approach a girl or you see a girl that you like you get these butterflies, this nervousness, and that story brought me back to some memories I had when I was in my teenage years, 16, 17, 18, even as a young man in my 20s, I didn't get panic attacks, but I would feel very, very nervous, and I wouldn't know what to say, and I would be just mumbling my words. So yeah, man, you call it approach anxiety is what they call it in game, So that would definitely shell shock a lot of men, to be honest. And in fact, there's some men that never even really recover from that, They literally go in this dark hole of not even trying to approach a girl again. And as we were saying off camera, the role of men and the journey of a man is different. And when it comes to girls, unfortunately, you have to have more girls in terms of approaches to get over that fear, because women get approached, so they don't know what it's like to approach. And to approach takes a lot of courage, a lot of self-belief. As we say in Barbados, you have to have balls like husk coconuts, and you have to really come out of your comfort zone in order to do it. And for some men, they never recover after a couple of rejections, and that affects them in their business life, it affects them in their personal life, it affects them in other relationships, because it creates a mindset of inadequacy, not being good enough, and all these kind of things. So I can totally feel where you were coming from with that one, because I've had some very bad sets that, and they say set, S-E-T-S, that's what in game you call it, how bad sets or the approaches where like it went horribly wrong, and I walked away feeling like an absolute embarrassment, and that floors you, So yeah, go on.
Yeah, it totally does. And I think, to bring in some of the psych terminology, right, is an event like that could become traumatic for a specific guy, right? And, sometimes people say uppercase T trauma, lowercase t trauma. I would say, for me specifically, those events were lowercase t trauma. It wasn't like, I watched some horrific tragedy play out in front of me. It was just that this thing that was really important to me when I was very young and didn't have really any experience went really, really poorly. And all of a sudden my brain is starting to say, okay, dating equals pain, dating equals panic attack, dating equals failure. Why continue the dating if that's what it's going to be? So when it comes to dealing with those things, just as we would deal with anxiety in a clinical setting, right, is one effective way to deal with anxiety is this thing called exposure therapy, which is essentially taking baby steps toward putting yourself in front of that scary stressor yet again. So, I like to be as concrete as I can on these shows. And what I would say is like those events really stuck with me. And subconsciously, I didn't really know it. But, for the rest of college, I essentially leaned on alcohol as a crutch. I would say, okay, well, if I have a few beers or if I have a few mixed drinks, like I'm not going to be as nervous. And then I can go, engage with these women that I want to engage with. And I'm not going to have a panic attack. My heart isn't going to race out of my chest, that kind of thing. Fast forward into my, I'd say like early to mid 20s. And eventually, I think everybody who drinks gets to the point of saying, one, this is not, good for my long-term physical health. But two, like, it's kind of sad, to be like, I have to go have like 4 or 5 beers to go talk to somebody. Sure. Like, as you said, it's nerve-wracking. It's a scary thing. You have to have cojones to go approach women that you're interested in. But at the same time, you go, we were talking a little bit pre-show about like masculinity and femininity and all that. And if you have to have, like, this was a thing that I had to confront in my own mind was, if I have to have several drinks just to go talk to somebody that I want to talk to, like, clearly I have some insecurities. And if I have those insecurities and I need to do certain things to look a certain way and present a certain way to a woman that I'm interested in, it's almost like the power dynamic is shifted in the wrong way, such that like I am, how do I even phrase it? I would sort of say like, I'm looking for them to almost validate me, which is never really it's not reliably going to lead to attraction, right? And so for me, a lot of the work was exposing myself to new conversations, to new dates, to new relationships, getting to the point of feeling more comfortable of saying, look, I can go out and I can have 1 beer and I can talk to somebody. Or, maybe I started at 4 and I went to 3 and 2 and 1 and so on. But eventually getting to that point of saying, I can go face these stressors that, they're not necessarily supposed to be that stressful, but like that's what the brain can pick them up as sometimes. And eventually I worked myself down to getting to the point of just being more comfortable dealing with these things. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I can be stone cold sober and walk up to the prettiest woman on the street, but it's just a gradual process of exposing yourself to these things that make you fearful, right? And again, the same thing happens whether it's you're afraid of, if you have dating anxiety, relationship anxiety, approach anxiety, or you're afraid of giving a public speech, going skydiving, what have you, right? You have to take gradual steps toward doing that thing again and again and again. And eventually you have an extinction effect where, to some degree, that thing just doesn't scare you as much as it used to. And the last piece I want to say on this is there's so much media out there on social media where people are like, face your fears and man up and do all this stuff. And it's like, this stuff takes a long, long time. And yes, you do have to face your fears to a degree. But if you think you're going to be like, hey, I just had this lowercase t traumatic thing happen to me. I had a panic attack in front of this girl, and now I have to go walk up to the prettiest girl I've ever seen and start a conversation with her. Like that does not work, right? You need to, for most people, right, the exposure piece is that you need to do it gradually such that your nervous system can say, okay, I'm dipping in my toes. Not so bad. Eventually I dip in my leg. Not so bad. And over time, you are, proverbially submerged, but you're not trying to do this thing overnight. It does take time.
Absolutely. It does take time. And it is basically akin to mastery, and mastery of self is mastery of one's state and one's emotions. So I totally agree with everything you said just now. So you come from a tech background. How did that analytical mindset shape your approach to mental health?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I like to touch on in regard to this subject. So the first one is just that if you read my first book, there's a lot of like parallels that I draw between like how computer systems operate and how the mind works. So the first one being like there's this thing in computer science called state management or a state machine diagram. What that basically is it's sort of like a technical diagram that we can draw that shows us how a computer program gets into different states, if you will, different configurations. So we can say, all right, for example, like if we're making a programmatic representation of a gumball machine, we would say that, in order for the gumball machine to disperse a gumball, it needs to have a quarter inside of it. So if somebody turns the crank and there's no quarter inside of it, it's not going to disperse that gumball, right? So essentially for any object that we want to represent in computer code, we can draw one of these state machine diagrams saying these are the different states that this program can get into and out of, and then here are the different ways that it does those things, right? So in order to move from the no coin inserted into the gumball state into the ready to dispense state, somebody has to enter to put a quarter into the machine, right? So I take this general paradigm or concept and say, in our own lives, for our own mental health, we are continuously moving between different emotional states, right? So we may be sad, we may be angry, we may be anxious, we may be depressed, and what we need to do for ourselves is figure out how are we traversing each of those states, right? How do we sometimes go from joyous to anxious? How do we sometimes go from hopeful to anxious? Figure out those patterns for ourselves and start to draw our own state machine diagram. That then allows us to say, okay, if I normally get from, this one positive state to this less positive state or negative state, as in anxiety, I can then start to figure out what some of those inputs are, right? And then alternatively, I can then say to myself, once I get into the anxiety state, I can figure out what I need to do to get out of it, right? To move to a different state. So the on the analytical side, the software side, the programming side, I basically just take some concepts from the software world and try to map them over to anxiety for effect, to make it a little bit more relatable to some folks, because obviously in this day and age, everybody's a little bit up on the technology and whatnot, right? The second thing I wanted to talk about here was basically that so for me, right, I would, and I still do, like I'm still a full-time software developer trying to do more of the writing and whatnot, but obviously got to keep the lights on and pay the bills. So for now I have a full-time job for, let's say, I think I've been out of college for 13 or so years now. So for the last 13 years, right, 40-ish hours a week, I've shown up and written software or contributed to teams that write software. And so when you do that for a long time, you start to think in that critical fashion, right? And I think the same can be said of a lot of us, folks who are listening, right? Is society essentially trains us through our jobs to think critically a lot of the time, if not all of the time, in the sense that if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, if you're an accountant, if you're a financial trader or a modeler, if you're a software developer, right, you are going to work every day, putting on your critical thinking hat and being rewarded through financial incentive, through a paycheck, to come up with creative solutions to problems. And so one thing that I discovered early on in my career was, really trying to fight these mental battles at the same time, was understanding that as I went to work 40 plus hours a week and then I went home, and the anxiety, for various reasons, like my anxiety was kind of always there, or it would emerge in certain scenarios. My job would train me to have that critical thinking lens and wear that hat all the time. And yet, when I applied those critical thinking skills to my anxiety, it often didn't work. In fact, it often backfired, right? So if you are thinking to yourself, I have to solve my anxiety, I have to outwit it, I have to outplay it, and all of those things, it's not long before you are deep into your mind over an emotional problem, making the problem that much worse. So the reason why I talk about this software stuff, not only for the sake of example and connecting back to different concepts and whatnot, is to say that we have to separate out the difference between a rational problem or a critical thinking skill problem and an emotional one. And when it comes to our mental health, when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to depression, those fall into that emotional category, which means, we really can't solve emotional problems with rational capacity. So we have to bring different solutions to the table. And that's sort of a jumping off point for a lot of the content that I write.
I completely get where you're coming from, because I used to be a civil engineer and I used to have to think critically. And like you said, my job was, things were basically black and white, and you get stuff done. And I remember I had a colleague that he used to joke with me and he used to say, Cave, I don't care how you do it, just get it done, yeah? And that was like our little joke between us, like when we have stuff to do. So I totally get where you have critical thinking and then having to deal with emotional stuff, because when my refinement period started a few years ago, I was trying to mentally figure out, why are all these things happening? How can I fix what's going on? So I tried to look at it from an analytical problem solving point of view, instead of realizing it was an emotional, spiritual, and energetic challenge that I had. So the skills that I had in my previous job were null and void and were no longer applicable. So I had to learn new skills and a new way of thinking and feeling in order to overcome those challenges. So it is hard when you're in that sort of discipline, I think you'll call it STEM. You'll call it STEM in the United States, right? So when you're in STEM, it is very hard to sort of use a different mind when you're having these emotional, spiritual, and sort of mental sort of problems, So was there ever a moment where you thought you'd lost it? And what did that moment teach you about surrender and growth?
I mean, I'll be totally honest and say that I think there's been a lot of those moments. And, it goes along with the second part of your question, right? Is what did that teach me about surrender and growth and all of those things? Is I would say that a lot of those different moments, and maybe I'll try to find one specifically to talk about, but a lot of those moments, they humble you, man. And to really speak to one of them, I talk about this sometimes on podcasts as well. As I was getting close to publishing my first book, I had actually just finished the manuscript, and to myself, this should be this amazing accomplishment. I should be so excited. On the one hand, I almost feel like I have my anxiety figured out, and I have, I was 28 at the time, and kind of had that kid energy, if you will, and I was just the confidence of a 20-year-old, right? And I'm thinking to myself, this is amazing. I've figured it all out, And yet when I was really honest with myself, I was like, the reason I don't feel like I can celebrate as much as I I think I should be able to is because I'm actually not in a great place mentally right now. And so what ended up happening was like, as I was finishing my first manuscript, I actually found myself in the grip of a new mental health battle. I was going through a depressive disorder. And it was so, I mean, depression is so brutal and so debilitating sometimes. But it was, for me, it was not just the depression itself, but it was the guilt that I placed on myself of saying, I'm about to go publish this book about mental health. And yet, like, I'm not really doing that great myself right now. So who am I to really talk about this stuff when I'm in a dark place? And the funny, like, quote unquote, funny or ironic piece of that struggle was that depressive episode that I ended up going through became the basis of my second book, which is the book on depression. And all I can really say about situations of that nature is, again, that they humble you, right? It's
Facts.
almost sometimes as if the universe is trying to send you some message, and they're like, the universe is like, hey, 28-year-old dude who thinks he has it all figured out, like, watch your step, right? There are still a lot of things that you don't know. There's a lot of pain and suffering that you might go through, or you might have to go through in the future, or that might be out there waiting for you. Who knows? But going through that episode really taught me to slow my roll a little bit and say, look, I don't have this all figured out. I don't know everything. It humbled me, but at the same time, it did make me a little bit more curious, right? Once I got through like the hardest days of that depressive episode, and to be honest, I mean, it lasted like a year. It was pretty rough, to be honest. But it's like, when you're in it for that long, I think eventually, and it's different for everyone, but when eventually you kind of hit some mark where you're like, I'm still here, I'm still alive. I'm not saying it's great, but I know that, like, I know how bad it's been. I don't really think it's going to get that much worse. And so if it only stays that bad, I know that even though that bad is brutal, I can tolerate that, because I've just tolerated that for the last however many months. And that eventually got me to the point of saying to myself, okay, if I know I can tolerate this on some level, then eventually I need to try to find some good in it, right? And so after however many months, I started saying to myself, look, Brian, you have a mental health platform. You have a book that you already wrote about anxiety. You've done this thing before where you've gone through a struggle and you got curious about it, and it really helped you grow in a large capacity. What if you did the same thing for this depressive battle? And you said to yourself, hey, look, I'm surrendering, in the sense that, hey, universe, hey, God, hey, whoever, I am putting my hands up and saying, I do not know how to deal with this right now. At the same time, I am admitting my faults, admitting my shortcomings, and saying, I am humbling myself. Please allow me to get through this thing. And then eventually on the other side, come away with some insights that help me. And then in turn, I can share with other people in the form of new content and help other folks get through their own depressive episodes. So I think, if you talk to a lot of people who have life experience and wisdom and all of that, a lot of folks say similar things, right? Is we don't want these things to happen to us. Nobody is sitting out there saying, oh, here's a battle of depression coming on. Like, this is great. I'm going to figure it all out and whatnot. Nobody is openly wishing for those things to happen to them. At the same time, once those things have already happened, a lot of people tend to try to find the silver lining in those occurrences, right? Because it's almost like, why not? What else would be the point? If you're just going to suffer for no reason and no meaning and no purpose, that seems kind of tough, right? But when you're able to look at those difficult experiences and say, what can I take away from this? What could be positive? What could be that silver lining, that light in a ton of darkness, right? That's where you start to reconnect to that spirituality and say, like, something good can become of this. I'm going to make lemonade out of lemons, and let's just see what happens. That's when you really, what's the right word? You accept the call to adventure, if you will. You say, life, I don't know where you're taking me, but I'm going along for the ride. Let's see what happens.
What you said is true, because I spoke to a guy called Brent Webb on my podcast, and he trained a lot of the stars. So he was like the coach, in Hollywood and stuff. And he said that a lot of these people who are in the public eye and are coaches and trying to teach people things also suffer from the same things that they are teaching other people, because, you know what I mean, we're all human ourselves. So what you're saying is something I think that every single person that is in the public domain, that is a coach or a guru or a teacher or whatever, they still battle with the same things that they teach their students with, but just at a different angle or different level or slightly different derivative or manifestation, but they still deal with it, right? And what I would say is that when you've dealt with it a certain amount of times, is this kind of like weird relationship you have with it, where it's like the emotion is still there, but you kind of like don't fear it as much. So it's like, okay, I know that you're kind of like there, you're trying to do this thing, but you know, I've overcome you before, so I know that I can overcome you again. So it's like you kind of like say, all right, I'll just have the experience, but I know that it doesn't define me and that I can overcome it. So you get like a different relationship with the fear or the trauma or the memory or whatever it is that bothers you. And I find that over time, the downtime that you have with that emotion or experience or thought is less and less. So eventually, with more reps, I guess, it would become like instantaneous, where you would like, it will come and it will just go, and even at the microscopic level, then you'll be able to just like swat it away. So I think that the relationship changes with time, but it definitely comes back over and over and over again. And where I am now is almost like I just expect it, right? Because it just seems to be there. And I find that a lot of people, when they're going through their refinement period or the dark night of the soul, some people think, oh, it's one and done. So I've overcome it once and that's it, it's done. And then it comes back again. Like, but I thought I overcame this. But it comes back again and again and again and again. And each time, slightly different perspective, slightly different lesson. And every time you overcome it, you get better to overcome it the next time. But you just have to use a slightly different mind to overcome it,
Yeah, a lot of good points. I mean, a lot of things come to mind for me as well. As obviously we don't want to downplay some of these difficulties, but obviously like the brain and the body are very adaptive. And so over time, if you're facing the same battle, there is definitely a likelihood that you will adapt to these things in some capacity. The other thing, right, is you can only face the same battle so many times, right? There's sort of an idea that, the universe will keep bringing you the same lesson until you learn that lesson, right? And I will come back to that in a second, but I just thought of one other quick point is, you had talked about like it gets a little bit easier, right? And I think one of the things that makes it easier is that when you identify the fact that this battle is the same one or in the same, it's related to or in the same camp as these other battles that you've had over time, eventually the fear of the unknown starts to go away, right? Because like I said when I was talking about the depressive episode, is it's not like in the middle of a depressive episode you're like, hey, depression is easy now, but you have enough reference points to look back and say, I've been in a very similar spot for the last 5 months, or I've had X panic attacks, or I've done this thing again and again and again. And so you start to build up sort of this criteria in your mind, or you have a history to say, right? Like, I can identify that this thing that I'm going through right now looks a lot like all these other past battles. And that gives you some perspective to say, like, it's only ever gotten so bad. And so once you can identify that, right, you can say to yourself, because where I'm really going with this is like, for a lot of folks, right, that first panic attack you have, that first dissociative episode you have, the first anxiety attack you have, the first depressive episode you have, when it is brand new to you, and I'm not trying to say that it's ever easy, but when it's brand new to you, the biggest thing, this is my own opinion, but I'm like, the scariest thing is the fear of the unknown, right? Because it's brand new to you and you say, well, I'm sitting on the couch and my heart is racing out of my chest and I can barely think. but I've never had this happen to me before. What if it got 5 times worse than this? Whereas if you've been through enough of those panic attacks or depressive episodes or whatever, right? And you have that historical context, you can eventually say to yourself, like, I know pretty much, I have a good sense of how bad this could possibly get. And I know that because I've been through this 100 times, I'm not saying it's pleasant. I'm not saying I want to go through it, but I know that I can get through it. And I know that that fear of the unknown is a little bit unfounded now, right? Me saying to myself, what if this got 10 times worse? Has it gotten 10 times worse than this in the past? If it hasn't, then you kind of have your answer there, right? And so tying back that last thread of like the universe will continue to send you the same battle until you get the messages. There's that like Buddhist phrase or whatever where they say like, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. It's kind of that thing of like, it's not really law of attraction. It's not really like who you are attracts certain things to you. But I guess what I would say is like, you are this object out in the universe, and there's always constant experiences and stressors and, happenings coming your way. And so if you are of a certain type, right, if you're like, I am anxious, I deal with anxiety, and then all these stressors come on you, it's going to feel as though the universe is sending you that same message because you're the same person and you haven't figured out how to deal with that anxiety just yet. So you could take that and abstract it out into any other kind of battle or whatever, right? But once you learn that lesson, and I'm not saying it's black and white of like, hey, I learned the lesson and anxiety's gone, but once you learn that lesson that the universe is trying to teach you, then you change, right? So in the sense of when the student is ready, the teacher appears, is like who you are dictates what the universe says to you. And then when you change, those messages might come back to you from the universe. And I know it sounds a little out there right now, but even if it's just, from society or your peers or your social circles or whatever, it's like if you used to have a really hard time dealing with angry people, that anger would come on to you and you'd be like, I'm getting all stressed out. I don't know how to deal with this, whatever. Eventually you learn the lesson, as in you find some way to deal with other people's anger and not let it affect you anymore. And then all of a sudden you are changed. There is still anger out in the world and it is coming your way, yet it doesn't affect you the same way that it used to. So it's almost like, you have to learn the lesson. And then all of a sudden you turn around and you're like, this thing might still be coming my way, but I don't even see it anymore. I don't experience it in that same capacity because it's not like I'm this magnet for the anger or the anxiety or whatever anymore. So I think those are important things to think about in this realm, and just understanding that as time goes on, we do, hopefully adapt to things. We do hopefully learn new things. We become different people. And then all of a sudden those battles look different to us if we even see them at all anymore.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And many people intellectualize their healing. What did it take for you to feel it in your body, not just your mind?
Again, honesty is my policy here. And I would say that this is still like a bit of a work in progress. And there's definitely, it's like an upward trajectory, but there's some days where, I take a step forward, maybe another day I take a couple steps back, that kind of thing. But overall, moving in the right direction. I really think, right, is, as the question is getting at, is you can think about these things and say to yourself, hey, I know anxiety, I know I deal with depression, whatever, but those are all rational thoughts, right? The emotional piece comes when you really accept yourself, accept your situation, and allow yourself to feel the feelings that you are feeling. That's a really difficult piece, right? Because especially for men, we always want to push these feelings down and say, I'm tougher than this, I'm better than this, anxiety can't get me, whatever. And I'm not saying that can't be a fruitful strategy, but a lot of the time we push that anxiety or that fear down or whatever negative emotion down for a long period of time, and then it pops back up at some point in our lives. And so again, it's that notion that the universe, or whatever you want to call it, will keep sending us the same battle until we learn the lesson is we can push down, we can push down, we can push down. But if we have not actually changed our ability to deal with that thing, then eventually it's going to keep popping back up. And how do we learn to deal with that thing is to really meet it at an emotional level, right? And the real challenge is, for most dudes, it would sound incredibly emasculating to be like, I'm going to sit on my bed. I'm going to think about my anxiety. I'm going to admit to myself that I struggle with this. I might even shed a few tears. I might not feel good for a long time. I might feel as though, this is maybe a feminine thing to do, but that's kind of on some broad level what you eventually need to do, right? Because otherwise you are on some level resisting that thing. And for me, right, a lot of the healing comes in when I just sit with it and I'm like, you know what? I deal with this stuff. Yeah, it kind of stinks. I'm not happy about it. I'm not really proud of it, but I'm not running away from it either. And when I stop running away from it and I'm allowed to, really be honest with myself and do a little bit of I think it's called inner child therapy or inner child work, and just think to yourself, right? Like think about who you were as a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, and talk to that person, right? And say, why are these feelings coming up? What are these messages trying to tell me, right? And just connect to that kid and say, look, on some level, we're all still kids, right? And to feel for that kid version of ourselves and say, look, man, when you were 5, I bet you didn't think you'd go through all of this. And I know it's really hard. And I wish we didn't have to go through all of it, but I'm here for you. I'm here with you. I've been here the whole time. I love you. I support you. I care for you. When you do that kind of thing and really admit to yourself the intensity of the battle and the emotions that you have been through, I know it sounds a bit emasculating, but it's actually kind of healing because, again, you're not resisting it anymore. And once you do that, you're able to kind of free yourself from it. Not in the blink of an eye, but continually doing that kind of work and saying to yourself, it's okay. I understand. I love you. I accept you. We've been through a lot. We're going to keep going. That's that. Those are the messages, the soulful messages that you really need to send to yourself, and the ones that are going to help you get through all of this.
Yeah, and the thing is, I find that it has to get to a point where it's so bad that you almost feel like there's no other choice but to give up to it, right? And that's the only time where you get the healing, you get the you cross the Rubicon, as my mate likes to say, where you get that aha moment where you're like, okay, it makes sense. I now see what I need to do. But unfortunately, most people and every single person I've spoken to has had that moment. And this is why I try to tell people, don't wait till you get to that moment. But it appears the case human beings are stubborn. I am a human being, I'm stubborn, and it had to become extremely bad for me before I actually surrendered to it. And then even when you surrender, you still have your moments where you battle with the surrender. But that's another conversation itself. But yeah, you do get a lot of moments where you actually question yourself and say, am I doing this right? Am I doing the right thing? Was that letting go and all that kind of stuff? So you call anxiety a biological alarm system. How do we know when it's protecting us versus when it's hijacking us?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I do want to answer the actual question, but let's talk about the biological alarm system, right? I would say it's not long into some exploration of anxiety, mental health, whatever, before you get to evolutionary psychology, the structure of the brain, the different parts of the body that play into anxiety and the stress response, right? And so we all know of the little, I don't know, story or example of people saying that, back 500,000 years ago when our ancestors were in front of a tiger, the alarm system in the body goes off as to say, you need to run away from this scary tiger or try to fight with it, right? And so within our brains and within our bodies, we have the acute stress response or the fight or flight response, also known as the sympathetic nervous system. And that is designed to get us away from threatening stimuli. We have all of that hardware as in, the brain, the nervous system itself. We still have all that hardware today. Our brains and bodies haven't really changed all that much in the last couple 100,000 years. The difference is that the lives that we live and the environment in which we live, those are very different from that of our ancestors a long, long time ago. So we still have that acute stress response and that alarm system in the body that is looking out for those threatening stimuli and sounding alarms when it picks up on one. The challenge is that in today's day and age, we don't actually face a lot of, true life or death situations or tigers or lions, right? We face proverbial ones or ones that are representations of scary things to us, if not representations of tigers to our minds. And when we come across those stimuli that we perceive as threatening on maybe not necessarily a physical level, maybe an emotional one, maybe a spiritual one, maybe a mental one, that same alarm system is ringing out in our bodies. And that's where we start to feel stress, right? We get that heart racing, maybe, our palms sweat, maybe we get the butterflies. And what you really find is that anxiety and stress, they are different, but they're not all that different. And so anxiety, like I would basically say, right, is like anxiety is future-oriented fear in the sense that if you're in front of a tiger, right, and you feel that response in the body, that is fear, that is in the moment fear that is trying to drive you away from that scary stimulus. Anxiety, on the other hand, is the feeling of fear, but abstracted out over a longer period of time where that stimulus is not in front of you, right? So when you get anxious over, let's say, a one-on-one with your boss that's coming up next week, you have that feeling of fear in the body, and the sympathetic nervous system in the body is revving up, and yet you can't really do anything about that one-on-one that's a week from now because it's a week from now, right? You can't fight with that meeting. You can't run from it, that kind of thing. So the challenge that we face in this day and age is the fact that we're stuck with all that, prehistoric or evolutionary wiring in the sense of the alarm system. And that alarm system is wired to sound in the face of these scary things. And yet a lot of the scary things we face these days are not immediate stressors. And that's where we get anxiety, right? Because we're dealing with all these things that are off in the distance or on our calendars. So coming back to the question itself and saying, what's the difference between, what's the difference between X and anxiety?
Yeah. How do we know when it's protecting us versus when it's hijacking us?
Thank you. So how do we know the difference between when it's protecting us and hijacking us? The answer really kind of comes down to the sort of preamble I just gave combined with, looking at the stressor itself. So let's, for example, and this also ties into some of, how a clinician would diagnose anxiety is, so when somebody says, hey, when a clinician says that somebody has an anxiety disorder, they are saying that they are dealing with such anxiety, so much anxiety, maybe in strength, duration, intensity, that kind of thing, that amount of anxiety is preventing that person from leading a normal life or the life that they want to, right? Therefore, they are being hijacked by these things that, normally don't hijack the average person. So, for example, if you have a one-on-one with your boss, which can be scary, but most people, that's a scary event for most people, but they just go do it. If you are thinking to yourself, wow, that one-on-one is a week from now, and yet I can't focus on anything else. I can barely get my work done. I can barely do the dishes. I can barely have a conversation with someone. That is tipping into the category of an anxious stressor or a provoking or threatening stressor, preventing you from living your life as you would like to, right? So that then helps us get back to the idea of what's the difference between, protective mechanisms or protective fear anxiety versus hijacked fear anxiety. It really comes down to a gut level of you being honest with yourself, right? And saying, okay, I have this scary thing that's coming up, but am I just scared of it and I'm living my life as normal? Or am I so scared of it that I can't focus on anything else? And it's essentially preventing me from doing the things in my life that I would like to do, right? And so this actually brings up a decent point, which is, when those of us who deal with anxiety versus those of us who do not, and also don't know that much about anxiety, start talking past one another, right? So somebody who has an anxiety disorder or deals with a lot of anxiety looks at one of these events and says, I got a one-on-one with my boss, or I have to go give a public speech, or I'm not sure how I'm going to pay my bills. And that thing debilitates that person such that they can't go live a normal life or they can't carry out their normal everyday tasks. The person who doesn't quite understand anxiety would say to themselves, it's just a one-on-one, get over it, not a big deal, right? What they're not seeing is how that anxiety is literally hijacking that person and preventing them from doing those normal things in their everyday life. So basically, to round it out, it's the same determination that a clinician would make. It would be us being honest with ourselves and saying, is this stressor preventing me from doing other things in my life because I'm so focused on it and I'm so scared about it? Or am I scared about it, yet I'm going and living my life as normal anyway, right? And if somebody who's listening is really trying to figure out, like, what side of the spectrum do I lean on, or, am I on the protective versus, more vigilant side, protective versus hijacking side, it's thinking about, like, what are the feelings within you? Is there a lot of dread, a sense of pending doom? Does it feel as though this event in your life is a be all and end all thing that's, pretty much consuming you? Or again, is it just something that you care about, that, you want to go a certain way, but you're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to get through it. Hopefully it goes well, but, like, I'm still living my life as normal, even in the face of it.
And I guess it also depends on the time factors, because if it's something in the moment, like where it is something you have to deal with there and then, is more time in terms of, like, protecting you, like if you have an accident and you have to lift your car up to save someone that's trapped, then the anxiety would be to protect, in that situation. But then if it's in the future, is more hijacking you because it's a future event. You can't actually change the event in the present moment because it's not happened yet. So I think that was, like, the high level takeaway I got from that, which kind of, like, makes sense because, it can go either way, but it all depends on time factors, and in the present moment. So that's kind of interesting. So you've written that depression is often unprocessed energy. How can men channel that energy instead of being crushed by it?
Yeah. This is a tough one just because it's a little nuanced, right? Like, there are different ways that we can experience depression. There are different forms of depression. There are different reasons for folks feeling depression. There are sometimes no reasons for feeling depression. So I have to answer this question, like, kind of in a specific way, right? And it's basically to say, in the form of depression where things go horribly wrong in your life, or they go in some fashion that you didn't want them to go, leading to great disappointment and eventually depression, there is an emotional energy inside of you, right, that is trapped, that you are saying to yourself, and kind of the off-color-ish example that I give sometimes is, if somebody walked in and said, hey, my dog just died, my mom's in the hospital, I hate my job, whatever, I would kind of look at that person and be, and they also said, in this example, and they're like, I'm depressed and I don't know why. I would say, I think it actually makes perfect sense that you're depressed. In fact, if you weren't depressed, I'd think there was something wrong with you, and not vice versa, right? So I'm kind of talking to that kind of example when I answer this question in the fashion that I'm answering it. And it's to say, right, is if you disconnect from that emotional energy of the disappointment, the heartbreak, the grief, which can be a great coping mechanism, and I'm not trying to dismiss that by any means, but if you disconnect from that, then you are also disconnecting from some of your power, right? Because that emotion is saying to you, these things that I really care about, that are really important to me, are not going in the fashion that I wanted them to go. It's a message from the world, from your life, from everything going on in your life, to say things need to change, right? It's I can't keep going this way. I can't keep working a job that I don't like. I can't keep, enduring heartbreak or tragedy or whatever. Or at the very least, if it's like, hey, my girlfriend just broke up with me and I'm depressed because of that, there's a message saying, like, yes, there is grief. There is a huge loss there. There's now a void in your life. But that emotion is also showing you that there's now a hole that you can fill, right? So the work eventually is, once you start to get through some of the sadness and the grief, is to go out and find, that new person that is going to fill that hole, and to take that emotional void, or the void itself and the painful emotions alongside it, and say, I can use this energy in some capacity. I can use this emotion in some capacity to launch myself into going and doing the work that I need to do to heal this wound, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I find that there's no other way, because the depression and the wounding, it acts as fuel all the time for the healing, because it gets to a point where the load becomes so heavy that you just break, and you literally get to a point where it actually hurts more to keep holding on than it does to actually let go. And when you get to that point where letting go feels easier than holding on, that is where you actually get the breakthrough and the transformation. And I always say all the time, I don't want people to go through that point, but it seems like if that's the only way that it happens, where it has to be a lived experience, because unless humans go through a traumatic experience, they never wake up, they never get to cross the Rubicon, as my mate puts it. They never get to that point where there's like, okay, you know what, this is just too heavy now, and the unknown is looking a lot easier than this thing that I'm carrying on my shoulders, and it's weighing a ton, and it's just weighing me down. So, but I hope that our conversation will be able to spark some people to at least don't wait till it gets that bad, because it gets pretty dark and scary, So when anxiety spikes, what's the first micro step you take before your thoughts spiral?
Yeah, we touched upon this a tiny bit already, right? In talking about evolution and the wiring of the body and the nervous system and whatnot. So the first step that I always take, and I'll tie this back further in a minute, is to just pause and take a breath. And the reason that we do that, right, is so I talked about when you face that threatening stimulus, your sympathetic nervous system revs up. That is, once again, your fight or flight nervous system. That is the acute stress response in the body. And so what that is designed to do, right, is to say, I'm in front of this scary thing. I need to fight with this thing, or I need to run away from it. And so the body is revving up as to say, I'm putting tons of blood into your legs and arms. Make that decision, right? It's essentially, it's propelling you to make that decision as to whether you're going to fight or you're going to flee. And the challenge in this day and age, right, is like, we're not really coming up against things that we really can or want to fight with or run away from. So a lot of the times, and often those things are actually just scary thoughts in our minds. And so when we get that sympathetic activation, what we really need to do, right, is pause and say to ourselves, okay, I'm not in front of a tiger right now. All that's really happened, in fact, is that my sympathetic nervous system has revved up. And once you learn a little bit more about the inner workings of the nervous system, you see that there's this other thing called the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's like kind of the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. It is called the rest and digest, or the feed and breathe system. It brings you back into a calm state after you get thrown into that, that state of inner turmoil, chaos, and, high energy of trying to run away or fight with this thing. And so once you understand that there is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and you say to yourself, okay, if I'm having these anxious thoughts and my sympathetic nervous system is revving up, and that is adding to my stress load, making my heart race and making me want to spin more anxious thoughts in my mind, then what I need to do is I need to find a way to get that sympathetic nervous system to calm down. AKA, I need to bring the parasympathetic back into play. And when you look into the nervous system a little bit, one of the most reliable ways to get the parasympathetic nervous system to activate is to do some deep breathing. So specifically, right, when you're breathing in, you increase your heart rate a little bit, and you kind of activate the sympathetic a tiny bit. And when you get a full deep exhale, you activate the parasympathetic, and you bring your body back into a little bit more of a state of calm, right? So when you're having those anxious thoughts, what I would tell folks is the first thing that I want you to do is try to take a step back and say to yourself, okay, yeah, I get that sympathetic activation. What does that mean? It means that I need to breathe and I need to activate my parasympathetic. Now, when I say activate the parasympathetic and breathe, I'm not talking about hyperventilating. I'm not talking about breathing really quickly. I'm actually saying pause, slow down, get a deep inhale, but more importantly, get that deep exhale. Without the deep exhale, you're not going to get the parasympathetic activation. You're therefore going to stay in that higher stress state, and the anxiety is going to prolong itself. So that is always my first step.
That's interesting. So you're saying the breathing out is what gets you back into the parasympathetic nervous system state. Because I would, because we kind of tend to focus on deep breathing in, but not the deep breathing out. Okay.
Yeah, and I obviously, like, if you're getting a deep breath in, that's good too. I'm not saying that like a deep breath in is going to, like, you know, rapidly shoot your heart rate up or anything like that. The most important thing is to slow down in general, right? To slow that breathing, to be more methodical with it, have that longer inhale, have that longer exhale. At the same time, like, to your point, we definitely do often think we put more emphasis on the breath in and then we quickly blow it out. I was actually listening to a book recently, and the author was like, she said, a lot of us do that quick exhale, not knowing that there's still a lot of breath and air left in our lungs. And so you almost want to over exaggerate it and do your best to push all of that air out before you stop and then go to the next breath.
Very interesting. I tell you what, I loved having conversations like this because all these little tips, tricks, and hacks I actually implement in my life. And I'm actually going to, the next time I'm in a stress situation, I do breathing sometimes, but I'll definitely take what you said into account and definitely try that for sure. So you teach naming your anxiety. Why is labeling emotions so powerful for breaking the mental loop?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to that old saying that, like, you know, you can't, and I'm going to butcher it, but you can't fix a problem that you haven't identified yet or that you haven't admitted you have yet, right? So being able to say to yourself, this is anxiety, I know that I deal with it, allows you to not only label it, but then also figure out when it is that you're dealing with that thing. And then once you have that label or identification, and you've done some extra learning, right? You've listened to a podcast like this one, you've read some blog posts or a couple books, and you've come and figured out a few tactics for yourself that help you deal with anxiety. You then have a nice little playbook for yourself, right? So you say, okay, I know what anxiety looks like. I now know that I'm in anxiety. I also have strategies or tactics for dealing with anxiety. So let me go get those right now and kind of figure this thing out in real time. Without being able to identify something like that, right, is it goes back to the idea of the fear of the unknown. Is if you're dealing with anxiety, but you're not calling it that thing, who knows what you're dealing with? Like, maybe you know on some level, but if you haven't been able to identify it and put it in that box, all of a sudden your brain is like, could this be a heart attack? Could this be, I'm losing my mind? Am I going to end up in a mental institution, right? So being able to identify things helps us put those labels on them and then say to ourselves, well, okay, now that I know that this is XYZ, I know what to look for, in the sense of I know what this comes alongside. And I know that this isn't a heart attack. This is just my heart racing because I'm nervous about this specific thing, right? So being able to label and identify these things not only helps us figure out how to deal with them, but it shrinks that possibility of, what could possibly go wrong here. Because eventually, you have that historical reference data to say, I know what anxiety looks like. I know it can only get so bad. And therefore, now that I've identified it right now, it's only going to get that bad, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Because you can't solve a problem if you don't acknowledge that you have a problem. So, if you never acknowledge that something is there, you'll literally be just like coughing in the wind, it just disappears, right? So yeah, totally makes sense. So we can talk about the 10 steps of getting out of your head. So can you walk us through how the 10-step framework came to life? Was it lived experience, research, or divine download?
Man, I like the way that you phrased that. It really was a combination of all three.
Okay.
It sort of manifested itself in the latter or the last one. But if I'm honest with myself, I'm like, it really was all three. So here's the backstory, right? And I'll just give I don't know. They're not that gory, but I'll give the maybe embarrassing details. So my first book, which is the one around anxiety, I had been dealing with anxiety for a long time already, close to a decade, but I had also been trying to work through it and figure out different tactics for myself that were helpful. I hadn't put it all together yet. I hadn't written really anything down yet. I was just going out in the world, taking in new information, going to therapy, reading journal articles, reading books, listening to books on tape, trying to amass all this information for myself and say, okay, like, I just listened to this book about anxiety and the guy told me to, do some deep breathing or to, engage in the 5-4-3-2-1 method. And, we can talk about all those things. But so I'm essentially just going out and finding this information for myself, but not really doing anything with it, not really like writing it down or anything like that. And so there was one summer where I'm sure this will come as a surprise, but there was another girl that brought me anxiety. And
Wait, don't say.
so yeah, exactly. So I started kind of seeing this girl, it was very unofficial. And also like we met, we went on a few dates, and then she was going for a long vacation. She had just left her job and was going to go backpack through Europe. And, at first I'm kind of like, okay, let this one go. This isn't, she's going to leave in a week or two. Not worth trying to make it happen as she goes goes to Europe for like 3 months or whatever. But we stayed in touch, and all of a sudden I'm kind of sitting there thinking to myself like, oh man, like I'm pretty into this one, and I want to see where this goes. Now, obviously, given the history that I've talked about on the podcast a little bit and the way my mind works and whatnot, it would come as no surprise to say that me saying, hey, let's see where this one goes, quickly devolved or spiraled into a lot of anxiety. And so basically for the whole summer, I sort of, I would not recommend this strategy unless you were like, if somebody were just like, hey, look, the heart wants what the heart wants, but I still might not recommend the strategy, which was basically, for better or for worse, I said to myself, this is the one that I want to try to make it happen with. And so even though she's gone for a few months, like I'm going to try to turn this into a real relationship. Now, the challenge with that is that person is gone for 3 months, right? And I deal with a lot of anxiety. And so, like these are the sort of embarrassing details that I don't love to talk about, but I will anyway, it's like she and I are talking for the whole summer or whatever. But at the same time, it's like she's on this fun adventure and just trying to have fun with it, right? And so I'm going on Instagram and I don't even know, Snapchat and whatnot. And just like day after day, it's kind of like, oh, I mean, that looks like an awesome adventure, but like she's posted pictures with a bunch of new guys and whatnot, right? And the anxiety in me is like, oh God, where is this going? Is this relationship not going to work out? Am I going to get my heart broken? Is she never going to come home? Is she going to move to Europe? XYZ, right? So long story short is I put myself through a lot of anxiety that summer because I cared so much about this relationship that hadn't even blossomed yet, And so while she was away, I put myself through so much of that anxiety that I really sat myself down and was like, dude, you have to figure this the F out, because if you don't, like, you're going to go to some bad places in your mind. And in a lot of ways I did, in the sense that like I was so nervous and so anxious all summer. But luckily nothing, it's not like I had a psychotic break or anything like that. So I'm grateful for that. Where I'm going with this is to say that when I sat myself down, was like, you got to figure this thing out. That was where I started to say to myself, like, okay, all this different information that I've been gathering over the years, I now need to like curate that and boil it down and come up with some tactics for myself that are going to help me get through this really anxiety provoking summer. And so why, when you said, was it a divine download or information gathering, whatever, right? The reason why I say maybe it was a little bit of a divine download was I was so anxious at work this one day. And I was I was doing consulting. I was at a client's office and I'm like in the seaport in Boston, looking out into the harbor. A lot of the times, right, when we have these divine downloads or whatever, we're in some state of awe, so I'm like looking out at the ocean, just like that really influenced my state of mind. And I'm sitting there being like, oh my goodness, I'm so anxious. I have to figure this out for myself. And it felt as though a light bulb popped into my mind and went off. And the light bulb basically said, like, here are some things that you can do for yourself in order to walk back the fear and anxiety that you're feeling in the moment, right? So the reason I say divine download is in that moment, I like took out my phone and I just started typing as fast as I could, right? I opened a note and I said anxiety. The title was anxiety tips. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And I think like kind of what was going on was essentially I had gathered all that information over the years and I had gone through a lot of life experience or a lot of anxiety provoking experiences. And then I was met with so much emotion on the anxiety front and thrust into this moment at my client's office where I was beside myself that it all just came flooding out, right? And so I said to myself, I'm now in a situation where I need tactics for myself to manage my own anxiety. Therefore, that's the impetus for me to pull out my phone and start writing down the things that I curated in the back of my mind over time. And so to finish that story out, and obviously if you want to ask questions about it or whatever, we can definitely do that. The 10 steps to getting out of your head, they became my own framework for dealing with my anxiety in the moment, born out of that moment at my client's office. And that note that I wrote on my phone, it's not like I sat there and was, immediately was like, step 1 is this and step 2 is that. But I wrote down a lot of things and I eventually went back and cleaned up that list and curated it yet again and said, okay, here we go. Here's step 1 all the way through step 10. And now let's write about all those steps and weave them into some narrative that eventually becomes, part of the first book, if not like a big part of it.
Okay, very interesting. And I just wanted to touch and say that what you did with the girl is a classic, what they say in game, that you had one-nitis. And one-nitis is the most terrible disease to catch because it kills everything, because you create a story, you get married, you have children and everything all in your mind with this person. And you've not even gone on a proper date with this person, or let alone had a conversation to find out what's going on. So it happens to all of us men. Like I've done it several times in my younger years, and it happens even when you're in sales as well. So it happens to you at various points in your life. So I guess it's just a matter of having more of an abundance mindset is the thing that overcomes that. So just to any guys out there listening, it happens to everyone. Don't feel that you're alone. And Brian is sharing a very important story that, to show that even though he's here on the podcast, he had a similar journey to what you are going through yourself. So which brings me on to my next.
And if I can, if I can just chime in, because I do feel like we're on a good thread, right? So with the game community, pickup artist community, all that stuff, right? Is obviously that stuff can get a bad rap. Just sort of, it can feel like not clean and sexy and all that stuff, right? I think the truth and what we were trying to hit on lies somewhere in the middle, right? Which is we're not trying to be cold and say, hey, you meet somebody that you like, pretend as though you don't have any feelings, pretend as though you don't have any emotions. It's to say, pace yourself, right? Because if I go back, like obviously, again, you go through these things and you try to pull the silver linings out of them and you say to yourself, wouldn't want to do it again, but in some ways I'm glad it happened or I learned from it. I can definitely say today that I would not put myself through something like that again. And it was kind of unnecessary, And how I look at that now is to say, one, as you alluded to, Todd, is like, if you are having this one-itis experience and having these stories in your mind of I'm going to marry this person and XYZ. Look, like we all love fantasies and movies and stuff like that. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's more that, so one, if you basically lock in on this one person and say it has to work with this person or else, you're putting so much pressure on yourself in the relationship. And most likely you're going to act in a way that pushes that person away, if not makes them repulsed by you. Right? Because you are clingy and you're too available and you're just sending all the wrong signs. So I think that is very important to call out. The other piece, and this is the thing that you really alluded to, Todd, was yes, it's great to have this cool fantasy in your mind and all of that. But when you're really honest with yourself, right, is if you develop that one-itis and you're like, it has to work with this person, not only are you putting pressure on yourself, but like you're buying into something that you don't even know is real yet, right? You don't even know this person yet. Like if you go on 2 dates with somebody, yes, there could be a spark and it could be really cool. But like when you actually have real relationships with people and you're like at the 6-month mark, the 12-month mark, whatever, you learn all sorts of things about people that you would not learn on dates 1, 2, or 3, right? And so what I'm saying is like, yes, you do want to find somebody that you're interested in. You do want to find somebody that you have that spark with. At the same time, like if you jump head over heels on date 1, like you're jumping into something with somebody that they haven't even exposed their true self yet, and neither have you, right? So all I'm saying is like, if you're going to build that story, build it after you've at least had your first fight and you know who the person is a little bit more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But again, I think it's part of the journey of a young man, though, because I think it's fair to say that all young men have done it. And it's only when you get in your latter years that you look back and you say, geez, I was just like needy and clingy, right? And it helps. And not everybody gets wisdom with age, but for me, age has definitely given me wisdom. So I look back and say that. And my mate puts it very well. He says, first you get the pain or the experience, then you get the lesson, and then you get the wisdom. And my mate always says that you can't get the wisdom without the pain or the experience. So even though the experience and the pain was bad, the pain and or the experience is what gave you the wisdom. So you must still be thankful for that person or that experience, because now you have wisdom that you can share with someone else, or you can apply in your life to not make the same mistake that you made in the past. So, it is the chicken or the egg, which comes, they both need each other, right? So,
yeah.
So
it's so true. And sorry, I just want to add one last thing is it's so true. We've all done it. We've all been there before. And it really goes back to that idea that the universe will keep sending you the same situation until you learn the lesson, right? And it stinks because you need that pain to go, to eventually get to the lesson. But again, if you're that same person, right, in this case, right, if you're continually doing the one-itis thing, the universe is basically saying to you, this is not working. And until you change your approach and you learn this lesson, you're going to keep getting this same pain. So eventually that pain changes you. The problem is that, it's so hard to go through. And on the other side of it, you're also like, do I even want to change? Why don't I just keep doing the same thing that I did? Maybe it'll work this next time.
But that's the definition of insanity, which is where most of humanity is right now. And I had a very huge dose of insanity. So this is me saying, like, the insanity got so much that I just couldn't take it anymore. So I just surrendered and let go. So which one of the 10 steps do you find most men resist the most, and why?
So I'm looking at the 10 steps right now, and I'm trying to come up with the answer because it's not evident to me right off the bat. If I had to pick one, I think one that comes to mind is step 7, which is get back to the present moment. I think men resist that because it sounds a little woo-woo, right?
I was just going to say.
Yeah, live in presence, live in the current moment and all of that, right? And so much of my writing and delivery, actually, I'm trying to cut through a lot of that resistance, right? And I'm trying to actually say hey, it might sound woo-woo, but it's actually not. So when we bring in the evolutionary science, when we bring in the nervous system and whatnot, I'm trying to come with harder facts that are going to allow men, the whole audience, but men specifically, to say, there's actually something credible here. It's not just this off in the distance spiritual woo-woo thing that Brian's talking about, right? And so how I relate that back to this 7th step of get back to the present moment is anxiety in many ways is essentially being pulled from the present moment into this future state of thinking about things that scare us, right? So when you are anxious, when you are experiencing anxiety, you go into your mind, you go into your head, turning over fears of things that could happen a day from now, a week from now, a month from now. And even though those things are scary, they're not here yet. They're not real yet, right? So being able to reconnect to the present moment allows you to say to yourself, me being in my head and thinking about those things in the future is actually causing me more anxiety. The less that I keep looping over those things and thinking about those things that are off in the distance, and the more that I reconnect, the more that I do that, the more anxiety I'm going to experience. Therefore, the more that I reconnect to the moment in front of me, the less fear I'm going to feel, the less anxiety I'm going to feel, the better I'm going to feel overall. So this one really, right, when I say, get back to the present moment, it's really not trying to be woo-woo. It's trying to say, like, your body, right, anytime that you think about a scary thing and, because it's anxiety, then that thing is off in the distance, you are basically sending a signal to your brain and to your nervous system and telling them to sound the alarms, right? So we want those alarms to stop ringing. So how do we do that? We reconnect to the present moment. We disconnect from that scary thing that's off in the distance. And how do we reconnect to the present moment? There's a lot of different ways, right? But like one of the most powerful ones would be to go engage in some task that you enjoy, right? Try to find a flow state, if you will. So I give the example in my book of, I used to play basketball in high school and I love going to the court and shooting hoops. So for me, a way to find that flow, to find that presence is to go to a basketball court, throw in some headphones, take some shots, listen to some fun music, keep shooting for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. And all I'm saying is like what we're trying to do is we're trying to find that activity that pulls us away from those future-oriented fears, right? That reconnects us with the very thing that is happening in front of us right now. Because this is where I will actually be woo-woo for a second. But the only moment we really have is that moment in front of us, right? That future that we are fearing, that we are scared of, that we are trying to prevent, it may eventually come into our lives, but it will come into our lives in the present moment, right? So it's all about managing that present moment and making it such that we are continually trying to get out of our heads and stop looping over those future-oriented things.
So what you said just now is the exact reason why I give my clients certain habits to do in my coaching programs. And one of the habits is do an enjoyable activity. And it's for that same reason, is to get them back into the present, because when you have a fitness journey, when you're going through a fitness journey, it's very similar to a spiritual awakening. When you only have the moment, the present moment, and when you do an enjoyable activity that takes you out of the thing that is stressing you, it gives your mind a bit of a break, your subconscious mind a bit of a break from having all of that stimuli from all the stuff going on. And that really helps you to, try to like overcome the same thing, because you're having a little bit of a disconnection. So what you said just now is the exact reason why and my clients, some of them would be like, ticking off my habits are a bit of a chore. I said, but when you do them, it actually makes you feel better. And they all say, well, yeah, it's true. Like when I do these things, but when when I don't feel like doing it, I said, but that's the time you actually should do them more. The times where you're down and don't feel it doing them, because it's going to pull you out and snap you out of that state. So thank you very much for explaining the reason why I do that in such an eloquent fashion. So one of your steps is embracing discomfort. How can we train ourselves to move toward pain consciously rather than run from it?
Another good question. I talk about this more so in my second book, which is centered around depression. And essentially, right, like the argument that I give there is, we almost all tell ourselves that we want to live this really comfortable lifestyle, right? Where like everything goes our way. We don't have to work too hard. We don't have to struggle too hard. Everything just goes swimmingly. And the challenge with that is like, eventually, if everything goes the way that you want it to, you eventually get spoiled or maybe bored with your situation, right? And so in life, the challenge is that we're really trying to find some Goldilocks zone. when we go back to the idea of finding flow, right, is the sweet spot of flow is where you find an activity that is not boring, but at the same time is not overly demanding or impossible. You're trying to find some activity that challenges your specific skill set just enough to engage you. And so in the same sense of, thinking about, leaning into difficult activities and whatnot, is we're trying to find activities in our own lives that make us feel accomplished, but at the same time feel achievable. So if we go out and we say, oh, I got to go run 20 miles every day for the rest of the year. I mean, that's, except for the marathon runners amongst us, and even them, they need days off. That's not going to happen, right? So that's too difficult and too challenging. Yet at the same time, if we say, my goal is to walk 1 minute a day, that's just not inspiring, right? So we're trying to find something that is going to fit in that Goldilocks zone that engages us, captivates us, and motivates us. And that's really what gets us going in life. So if we're constantly, again, if we're on either side of the Goldilocks zone, like we're not in the place that we want to be, when we are, as in, things are too boring or things are way too difficult, when we start to find things that are a nice challenge, an approachable challenge, that's where, you can say to somebody, hey, like I challenge you to take up this task. And if it's within that Goldilocks zone, they're going to be more likely to take it up. And then once they actually do that thing and get, maybe it's a flow state or maybe it's just a sense of accomplishment, they're going to turn around and be like, hey, I pushed myself. I did that thing. I can do more of those things. Hey, let me go see what else I can do, right? And that is where growth really comes from, is saying to yourself, I know where I'm at right now. I'm going to try to push myself a little bit more than that in the next session or, the next experience that I have, and then just continually do that across my days or your days or whatever. And I think connecting that back to mental health, right, is like we're looking similarly for the same kinds of situations that push us into growth mode, right? So people will often say that like what you desire is on the other side of your fear, right? So I talk about in my first book of, and I'm not saying that I moved mountains or anything like that, but so after the girl who I had one-itis for went off to Europe and had a great time, and she came back and I talked to her and seemed like her life had really kind of transformed because she pushed herself into this scary and unknown adventure. I thought to myself, like, darn, like I want to do that. I want to grow in that same capacity. And so the following summer, I did something similar where I embarked on a journey across Europe and backpacking and whatnot. And I knew I could do it, but I also knew I was very afraid of it because I had never really traveled by myself before. I don't really like flying, and it was a lot of uncertainty in general. And on the other side of that trip, right, I came back and I was like, wow, I had so many cool experiences. I met so many new friends. I had a great time. And honestly, being able to look at that journey now from this other side, I look at it and I'm like, it's not to say like, oh, what was there to be afraid of? But it was more so to say that like, I'm now comfortable going and doing another thing like that again in the future. And so that's what's on the table for us, right? Is to say that one, what you want is probably on the other side of your fear. And two, that if you look at that fear and you say, I'm going to go try to do it anyway, not only might you get some enjoyment out of it, but you're definitely over time, you're going to grow a lot from those different experiences. So sometimes, right, people will say like, don't resist your fear and your anxiety, listen to it, right? In the sense of it is sort of that compass that is telling you like, ooh, I know you don't really want to do that thing, but you should do that thing. Because if you do that thing, good things could definitely happen. So when we orient ourselves in that fashion and think about, okay, what are some of these opportunities that I could lean into that would push me a little bit? We can not only grow, but, it can help us find ways out of anxiety and depression. And I know I didn't talk all that much about the depression piece, but it's really like making sure that, we're trying to find lives that, once again, are not in that boring category where we eventually wake up and we're just not inspired to do anything, right? We want to find that zest for life that calls us out of bed each morning and gives us a reason to put one foot in front of the other and go find some meaning and purpose in our lives.
Yeah, it's definitely about being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And this is why I always tell my clients that, You have to lean into your edge. You have to come out of your comfort zone, because the growth, the happiness, the love, the abundance is all on the other side of your edge, all on the other side of your comfort zone. So it's a matter of doing things that you have to do, even though you don't want to do them, because you don't get things that you want, you get things that you have to have. And when you have to have something, it doesn't matter the fear, the anxiety, depression. If you have to have it, you will do whatever you need to do to get it, which is a kind of a shift in mindset. So you've said the opposite of anxiety is trust. What is the most effective way to build that trust in yourself and in life?
Yeah, this is where I guess I'll kind of poo-poo on the self-help industry a little bit, right? Is you read these articles online, you see these catchy YouTube titles and whatnot, and people will say like, oh, here's this one simple trick to conquer anxiety or face your fears or whatever, right? The reality is that with trying to solve some large problem in your life, such as anxiety, you really have to go at it again and again and again. And you have to build a stack of evidence for yourself to be able to say, I've done this thing many times. I know how it goes. I know who I am. I know how I respond to these things. And given enough of that evidence, I now trust myself in my capabilities because I've done this thing many times before. And I also trust that a situation of this flavor is going to go in a certain fashion because I've seen it many times before. So in a lot of ways, right, you're sort of trying to build your own algorithms, if you will, right? Is to say, okay, I've processed enough of these experiences before to know what the gamut looks like. And I've been through enough anxiety before to know what that gamut looks like as well. And so over time, what you're trying to do is develop that confidence in yourself to say, I've been through, I don't know, and I'm not saying me, but like somebody could say, I've been through 500 anxiety episodes, or I've been through 300 anxiety provoking events, or I've done 100 different speeches that I was super nervous to give, right? And eventually you build up that stack of evidence, and then you can look at it and you can say, okay, the next time that I go to something that scares me, or the next time that I'm dealing with anxiety, I can look at that evidence and I can say to myself, I now have reason to trust that things are going to go a certain way, or that I'm going to act a certain way, because that's how they've gone in the past, right? And so me saying, hey, we got to, poo-poo on the self-help industry a little bit is to say the truth of what those folks might be trying to say in the sense of, oh, conquer anxiety in 10 minutes or in one action step or whatever is the real truth is that growth and that change takes a long period of time, and it takes many little battles and wins. And that's not sexy, right? Because like if we're trying to sell a book or a YouTube course or whatever it is, right? Like nobody's really going to say like, oh, let me go watch this thing that says anxiety is going to take a long time to figure out. But the truth is that like if you keep showing up day after day after day, you will eventually look back and be like, I didn't even realize that I changed or grew as much as I did because it took that amount of time. But that's, for most folks that have been through it before, that's what they would tell you is that's how you get that growth.
Yeah, it definitely takes time. So guys, we can take a very, very short break here to say, if you are listening right now and this conversation is hitting home, take a second to pause and share this episode with a friend who's silently struggling. You never know whose life this could shift. This is how we grow consciousness together. If you're listening on a podcast platform, leave us a 5-star review, as that helps us to be recommended in the algorithms. Because the more men who get out of their head, the faster we evolve as a collective. And also follow us on Instagram at Adriano_246 or at the Conscious Man 7 podcast and Todd Cave on Facebook to see what we get up to daily. Now let's go even deeper. So let's talk about men, mental health, and silent suffering. So you've said that high achieving men often suffer in silence. Why do you think success and suffering are so intertwined?
Well, I guess the first one would be that there's a quote that I've heard a few times, and they would say that the most successful people in life are basically just walking undiagnosed anxiety disorders, right? In the sense that, yeah, and not every single person, but if you think about it, right, is if you deal with a lot of anxiety or you experience a lot of anxiety, but you don't really want to actually deal with it, you then have this emotion that's stirring inside of you all the time. And it kind of becomes this propellant, right? Where you're like, okay, one way for me to quote unquote deal with the anxiety is to throw myself into work and to throw myself into things that distract me from the anxiety, such that the anxiety is still propelling me, even if I can't totally see it. And yet I'm doing these things that distract me from those feelings, make me feel accomplished, make me feel better, allow me to not necessarily admit the fact that I'm dealing with this anxiety and just keep propelling me forward. So I guess how I would kind of rephrase that is basically saying that it's almost like the anxiety becomes the reason for the success, because, you know, that person essentially says, my coping mechanism for dealing with this anxiety is to essentially become a bit of a workaholic. And the nice thing about that, right, is like success is fun and success is exciting. And it's certainly a better and more empowering way of coping with anxiety than, you know, turning to drugs and alcohol or gambling or whatever, right? So I think in a lot of ways, people would say, or, you know, they might not say it because they might not be able to admit it to themselves, but, you know, especially if we look at, like, I don't know, think about the fact that in the last decade, we've made a lot of progress on the conversation around mental health in society in general. But, you know, we think about some of the most prolific, successful people, you know, the stories that are in business school cases and whatnot. Those people typically come from a little bit earlier, right? When the conversation around mental health was not as expanded as it is now, aka where we were in the 80s, the 90s, the aughts, that kind of thing, right? Is if those folks didn't know that it was okay to talk about their anxiety and find ways through it, they might just say to themselves, okay, I see this work thing over here. I can throw myself into that, and then I don't have to feel as much anxiety. It does become an empowering outlet. I'm not saying it's the most empowering, but it's certainly one that can work, and for a lot of people does work. Now, obviously, you find some different characters across the spectrum of, I don't know if Steve Jobs actually, encountered anxiety, or if he just had, a certain personality or temperament or whatever. But you hear of these different stories of some of these really successful people, right? They're successful in their careers, and yet there are other places in their life that are, you know, those folks are encountering all sorts of problems in other areas of their lives, right? So somebody like Steve Jobs, right? I read his biography, or I think it was biography by Walter Isaacson. He constantly, was in arguments with people, and his relationships were constantly strained and that sort of thing. So you look at stories like this and you say to yourself, like, okay, maybe this is just a hypothesis, but maybe those folks threw themselves into work because they're like, I know that I can control this thing. And when I'm working on my company or my job or whatever, I don't have to focus on my anxiety. Now, the problem with that, right, could be that by throwing all of their attention and focus and efforts into that one channel, they are therefore abandoning some other channels in their life. That is where we kind of break it down and we say, hey, maybe even though it is empowering in some ways, it is also disempowering or a little bit destructive in other ways. I know that I feel like you had another part of the question that I didn't answer. Can you remind me of what that was?
So I was just going to ask you, why do you think success and suffering are so intertwined?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously kind of hitting on it a little bit already, which is like, if somebody's dealing with anxiety and throwing themselves into this, coping mechanism in order to deal with it, essentially what's happening is like they are sort of neglecting other areas of their life. And from that neglect can come some suffering, right? So again, not to pick on Steve Jobs, obviously he's not here anymore. But at the same time, right, as we hear of these stories of like he had marital issues and family issues and issues with his daughter and whatnot. And I would say that suffering is born out of the fact that, maybe he had some sort of personality disorder or whatever. And the way that he coped with that was by throwing himself into work. Now, through throwing himself into work, he became very successful. But then as a byproduct of doing that, he inevitably neglected other areas of his life that caused him suffering. I guess another thing, right? I don't know. I think that's kind of the main through line that I want to say here is basically like, if you're dealing with a problem and then you find a way, if you're struggling with a problem and then you find a way to deal with it or cope with it and you throw yourself into that coping mechanism, inevitably you might find yourself neglecting other areas of your life that then lead to suffering. And this sort of brings me into a point that I made in my second book, which was essentially saying that so that book is on depression. And the point that I was making in this specific chapter that I'm alluding to is that one of the ways that we can find ourselves in depression, or we can stumble upon depression, if you will, is by leading a life that is out of balance, right? So essentially we hyper focus on one specific area of our lives and let the other ones fall by the wayside. Eventually, those things that we have neglected come knocking and are like, hey, hey, buddy, when was the last time you thought about your physical health? I know you care a lot about your finances, but when was the last salad you ate or whatever, right? And so again, it kind of comes back to this notion of if we're going to be successful, we're hyper focusing on some area of our lives, and probably or maybe neglecting some other ones. And out of that neglect can come some suffering. That's the best answer that I have at the moment. I'll let that simmer and see if anything else comes up. But I feel like that's the foot that I want to land on.
Okay, so what are some of the hidden signs that a man is struggling, even when his life looks perfect from the outside?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is random outbursts, right? Sort of like a bubbling up of all sorts of things and a release of strong emotions, right? So if somebody is, going along and everything looks fine, but eventually there are these outbursts, it's a sign of hey, something is really bubbling under the surface and things are maybe not going as well as we think they're going. So that's definitely one of the things. I guess another one, right, would be an inability to talk about these certain things, right? So if you're always going along and, having if there's somebody in your life for whom everything seems good, but you never really get, when you talk to them, you never really get below the surface level, that could be an indication of because obviously, right, we're all humans. We all struggle with our emotions. We all struggle with something in general. And if somebody is constantly trying to live at the surface level of things and never going deeper with you, that might mean that they're not willing to open up about those things. And therefore they are struggling with those things. So I'm sure we all have a friend or two who it's you try to prod a little bit, to try to, throw them a little bit of an emotional softball, if you will, to be hey, how's the family doing? Or how are you doing? How are you feeling? And they never want to go deeper than some, sort of surface level thing. If they don't, to me, that feels like a little bit of an indication that things might not be going as well as we think they're going. At the very least, it kind of indicates to me that, they're not comfortable opening up as much as we would like them to. And then that in turn makes me feel as though maybe there's something underneath the surface that they don't even want to talk about with themselves. So those are a couple of them. Obviously, there's more, but I don't know. I feel in general, people, there are signs, right? And when you're kind of talking to people and looking for those signs and not getting them, or you're getting the wrong ones, right? Of, hey, this person's super nice to me and they seem congenial and all that. And then all of a sudden they have these random outbursts, right? It's okay, something is happening there that we are not addressing. And maybe that person needs to do that because obviously there's this bubbling up of emotion that eventually leads to some sort of explosion.
Okay. And how can men begin to redefine strength, not as suppression, but as conscious expression?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the way that I frame this, or the way that I think about this, right, is they will often say that masculine energy or men respond to challenges and therefore try to overcome challenges or try to fix things and try to solve things, right? And so another way of looking at that is to say that if you are suppressing your emotions, if you are not dealing with some of the problems that you are encountering, then you are, and I know maybe this is meant to be a little bit provoking, you are not acting in a masculine fashion, right? You are not trying to solve that thing or you are at least saying to yourself, I don't know how to solve it right now. So a reframe for folks who are like, nah, it's unmanly for me to admit my problems and deal with emotional struggles and whatnot, would be to say, I actually think it's the opposite. If you're unwilling to talk about these things, if you're unwilling to explore them and find ways through them for yourself, then you are not responding to that challenge. You are not trying to figure out how to overcome that thing. And therefore, in a way, you are giving this thing more power than you have yourself, right? And if you are not constantly coming back to yourself and saying, I believe in myself, I believe in my ability to overcome challenges, I believe in my ability to get through these things no matter how difficult, I would challenge the person who is thinking that way and say, that's not that masculine, is it? So maybe confront those challenges, face them head on, figure out a way to problem solve them, if you will, get through them, get on to the next one, and use each of those problems as a way to accomplish something and feel better about yourself and grow. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So what role does vulnerability play in leadership and masculine evolution?
Yeah, I mean, it's another good question. So what comes to mind, right, is like, so if we think about like, what is leadership? Leadership is essentially doing the hard things first, in the sense that somebody who leads goes first. If we say, hey, and I'm just making this up, right? But like if it's a basketball game or a practice or whatever, and you're like, I'm a little nervous, I don't want to shoot first. You go first, right? That person is leading. And so we take that example and we say, in any domain, somebody who goes first in a situation that is uncertain or scary or whatever, they are leading, and therefore they are a leader. The vulnerability piece comes in the same fashion, which is to say that if you speak up first, if you admit your faults first, if you admit your struggles first, then you are leading emotionally. And the reason why it's called leadership and not something else, or the reason that you are leading, is you are taking that risk to say, I actually am not 100% sure that it's okay for me to say these things or do these things or go first, but I'm going to stick my neck out there and do them anyway. And so when you are vulnerable, right, you are saying, I am willing to lead emotionally. I am willing to lead from the perspective of honesty. And maybe not everybody is going to be okay with that. Maybe people are going to be uncomfortable. But if you wait for somebody else to do it, then you are not quite leading, right? And then there's no shame in that, but it's just a matter of fact. When you instead lead emotionally with that vulnerability, you open yourself up to additional possibilities and ways of finding solutions for yourself, right? When you say, hey, I feel really uncomfortable talking about my anxiety to other people, but I'm going to do it anyway, then you are leading yourself to ways of figuring out that problem, in the sense of you lead yourself into a therapist's office. And guess what? That therapist is going to help you work through your problems. You lead yourself into a conversation where you go first and you are vulnerable and you are open with somebody. And maybe in turn, that allows them to be open and vulnerable with you. And then eventually, right through all this vulnerability, you're having deeper conversations, you're learning more things from other people, and all of those learnings come together to help you figure out how to deal with these different problems in your life.
What you were saying just now triggered a thought in me, and there was one word that came to mind: responsibility, that echoes leadership. Because one of the things that I find that a lot of men don't do these days is that they don't take responsibility for their actions. And this is why you find that a lot of men have kids with women and they don't even check for their kids or anything like that, because they're not taking responsibility. There's no leadership, right? Because leadership means that you take responsibility and you take care of your children, right? So yeah, definitely leadership plays a really important part in the evolution of a man. And then I would put right behind that their responsibility, So in your experience, what's the link between mental healing and spiritual awakening?
Another good question. I don't have an immediate answer, but let's try to walk through it a little bit, right? So we've got mental healing and we've got spiritual awakening. Now, I don't exactly know the definition of spirituality, but I think we can all feel it, right? And when we think about our mental health and healing mentally, right, is we talked earlier about like the rational versus emotional thing, and you can rationally understand that you're dealing with anxiety or some other emotional problem. But if you don't feel it emotionally and you don't allow for those emotions, you're probably not going to heal all that much, right? So, another way of saying that is in order for us to heal, we need to allow ourselves to experience those emotions, be honest with ourselves, be vulnerable with ourselves. And hey, if we need to, cry a little bit or feel a certain kind of way, that's what we have to do. Now, bringing that over to the spiritual side, right, is like, again, I don't have the definition for spirituality on hand, but if I could kind of come up with one for myself, it would be definitely very emotion driven and also values driven, right? In the sense of like spirituality to me is connecting with something that is important to you. And it's important to you because it's something that you value or it's one of your values. And also like there's a bit of an element of feeling as though there is something greater than yourself at play or at work, right? And so then when we kind of connect those two things and we say to ourselves, all right, I'm trying to find mental healing. I'm doing that deep emotional work. I'm allowing myself to feel these different feelings and work through them. Eventually, you get to that point of feeling as though this is a spiritual journey because you have that sense of surrender, right, to the emotions. And you say, this battle, this challenge, this difficulty is greater than me. Universe, God, whoever, I give this problem over to you, knowing that I can't fix it and I can't solve it all on my own. All I can really do is be open and honest and vulnerable with my emotions and with myself and say, hey, I deal with these things. I struggle with these things. I'm putting them on the table so that I can talk about them and work through them and feel those emotions. And then once you do, right, once you've done all of that and said, I'm handing this over to a force larger than myself, and in doing that, I allow myself to feel those emotions and work through them. Eventually, you find some insights, and then you connect it all back and you say, oh, something outside of me, something larger than me, made me feel as though I can get through this thing, or even got me through this thing. And when I think about my own values, right, I value alignment. I value, honesty and trustworthiness. And perseverance and all of those things. And so when you look at the work that you did and you say, I persevered and I was honest and I was aligned with who I am at an emotional level, all of those things come together and basically say, yeah, emotional healing is spiritual healing, right? And when you push down the things that you care about most, you're probably not going to be very mentally healthy. So bringing those things back up to the surface, working through them and reconnecting with them allows you to find that feeling of spirituality and eventually find that healing that you need and that closure that you need.
Yeah, and it's very much that they're all linked because I always say that you're a mind, body, spirit complex. And in reality, you have to deal with all three at the same time. You get the body in shape, you work on your mindset, your thoughts, beliefs, fears, and traumas. And then that allows you to realize the spirit that's inside of you so that, you can connect with it. And I mean, you're always connect to it, but is the lack of realization that the spirit is there is the main problem, which is where gnosis, which is what Yeshua talks about, knowing thyself. And is in knowing thyself that you actually realize how great you are. So you do get the mental healing and the spiritual awakening simultaneously, because they're actually one and the same thing. It's just different elements and parts of you that you're dealing with, So can anxiety actually be a spiritual teacher if we stop resisting it?
Yeah, no doubt about it. Kind of going back to like what we just talked about and then some of the other things we've touched upon in this conversation, right? Is I had said earlier that some folks will say, the things that you want, your greatest desires are on the other side of your fear, or, anxiety can be a compass pointing you in the direction of growth and what you care about most. it's hard not to hear those things and think that anxiety becomes this spiritual journey, right? In the sense of we have these different messages in our mind or these thoughts of, oh, I want to do this thing, but I can't do it, right? Or I'd love to do that, but I can't. I'm too nervous, I'm too anxious, I'm too afraid of what could happen. And in a lot of ways, like I'm not saying that you always need to just jump headfirst into things that scare you or things you care about or whatever. But eventually, right, is again, this being a long game, is the years go by and eventually you look at these different things that scare you and you say to yourself, if I'm continually avoiding them and being stuck in this same spot that I'm in, and if that spot that I'm in is one that I don't really like, eventually I circle back around to seeing that I can no longer avoid all of these things. And, we talked about spirituality and values and all of that. Is if you're avoiding those things that you care about, then again, you value those things. And therefore, if you are avoiding your values, you are living in misalignment. And so once you realign yourself and you say, look, I'm going to value the thing that I care about more than the fear, then you put yourself in that direction of being able to go after the things that you care about. And then when you do those things, again, you get back to that piece of saying, on the other side, I did what I wanted to do. I persevered. I worked through difficulty. I did something because I cared about it. Maybe if it's a specific purpose or, even if it's dating, right? And you're like, I pushed through my anxiety because I want to find somebody. I want to find a soulmate or a partner or a wife or whatever, right? You look back and you say to yourself, my anxiety was trying to tell me not to go after those things that I valued. And yet I did those things anyway. I reconnected to my values and I found, that spiritual path of reconnecting to all those suppressed and hidden emotions inside of me. And when you reconnect to those things, right, all of those deep emotions, it's hard not to feel spiritual because it's that larger thing outside of us, that thing that calls us to adventure. And all of those emotions, right, that whirlwind that plays inside of us on the other side of dealing with our struggles or going after our fears or working through our fears, it's hard not to have some release and be like, I did it. I lived life the way I wanted to, or I played this situation the way that I wanted to. I worked through the fears. It's hard not to feel as though there's something larger than you at work in that circumstance. And therefore, it's hard not to feel as though eventually anxiety reveals itself to be a bit of a spiritual journey.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, anxiety is almost like pain. And I particularly don't really like pain. But again, I realize that it's only through pain that I get growth. I get answers. I get the wisdom, the pain, then the lesson, then the wisdom. So that's another trinity there that seems to be a fact in this particular realm, this universe. And it definitely has been a teacher for me. So what's one practice that reconnects you to something larger than yourself when the noise gets loud?
Yeah. For me, it's always been running. And I couldn't really tell you why. My best guess is just that, my nervous system is always on high alert. And it kind of always has been because I deal with anxiety, right? And when your nervous system is always revved up and ramped up, on a biological basis, what that really means is, you have a lot of cortisol and adrenaline flowing through your bloodstream at, most hours of the day or many hours of the day. And again, going back to the evolutionary psychology thing, is those chemicals in our bodies are designed to get us moving, right? To run from or fight with the scary things in front of us. And so if we're not using that adrenaline and that cortisol to propel us into action, we're going to feel stuck and we're going to feel anxious. And so for me, when I go out and I go for a run, I feel as though I am using that adrenaline and cortisol in a positive fashion. And I'm almost burning it off in a way. And once I burn it off, I almost feel as though everything in my body and my mind aligns and makes sense. And so for me, one of the best ways to mitigate my anxiety has always been to go for a run. That's my best way of making sense of it. And I just know that if I'm having a bad day, if I'm very anxious, if I don't know what to do, if I go for a run, I will eventually get that click, that alignment, and I'm going to feel better.
Interesting. For me, it is exercise, and I love calisthenics. And calisthenics for me really is a very much like a spiritual journey, because to really get strong in calisthenics and be able to do certain types of exercises requires a lot of dedication, time, effort, and blood, sweat, and tears. And I find that, like when you want to be able to do things like the planche and the front lever and back lever, it takes an extreme amounts of level of conditioning. And that conditioning comes also mental condition, because you have to do mental visualization to be able to do these exercises as well, because they're difficult to do. And for me, I find that calisthenics is the thing that helps me to really if I'm having issues and I hit my body hard, then I'm able to get a little bit more clarity and stuff, because you have to really push your mind to other limits to be able to do it, because the mind is actually stronger than the body. And, I recently was able to do the planche without the back resistance bands for the first time ever. It took me only 4 years and 10 months, to do. And I mean, the younger bucks, they can do it in a year, but, I'm a little bit more, I'm a little bit more experienced than those guys in terms of youth, but, I was able to do it anyway. So for me, and that's one of the reasons to why all my clients do calisthenics as well, because not only it gets you in shape, but mentally it pushes you to that other level that you have to come out of your comfort zone. You have to confront your, I can't do it belief system, because if you tell yourself you can't do it, you'll never be able to do calisthenics, because it's really hard. But when you realize, when you level up and you get to perform these exercises, there's this real sense of achievement, wow. And that allows you to transfer to other areas of your life to give you growth. So let's get you on this one. What do you believe is the ultimate purpose of going through anxiety and depression? Why do our souls choose these paths?
Oh man, this is a hard one. What is the purpose? I think the purpose is ultimately to grow. We talked about going back to I'm going back to this idea we talked about of the universe will keep bringing you the same lesson until you learn it, right? Until you learn of a different way to deal with anxiety or a different way to deal with depression, to see these conditions in different lights, to bring different tactics to them, those things are going to keep coming your way and showing you that there is some vulnerability or thing that you don't yet understand, right? And so looking at it through that lens, you can then say, okay, one way of interpreting going through anxiety and going through depression is saying that I am going through some situation that I don't yet understand how to deal with. Therefore, once I figure out how to deal with it, I will learn something and I will grow. And so that growth is what I'm after. Now, one thing that I love that you've talked about during this show, that is, it's kind of like, I'm obviously trying not to be grim, but it's like one of the truths of life is that you don't really get that growth without the pain. It's just kind of a fact of life, right? And so I wish it weren't so. I wish you didn't have to go through any pain or nearly as much pain in order to get that growth and get those learnings. But, I'm 35. Based on my 35 years of life, that to me, that seems to be how it goes. So that's what I would say is probably the purpose of going through anxiety and going through depression. Remind me the second part of the question.
Why do our souls choose these paths?
Yeah, this is the harder part. Thank you. The reason I struggle is because, I think back to when I wrote my when I wrote my second book, and I went on a podcast and I talked to one of my friends, and he was like, same guy who did the podcast. And he was like, Brian, why did you choose this book? And I was like, dude, I'm not trying to self-aggrandize or sound arrogant, but I did not choose this book. I did not choose this battle. This book chose me. This battle chose me. I'm just writing the book because it called me to action, And so my way of answering this question is, I don't know if we choose or our souls choose. It might just be that the universe chooses us for it, chooses it for us. Sorry. But I would honestly say that I don't think it matters that much. I think the more important piece is like, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do about it? And that goes back to the first part, which is, what is the purpose behind these battles? It's to grow and to become a better version of yourself that leads a better, more fulfilling life, that eventually can turn around and share this information with other people and make it such that they lead better, more fulfilling lives. I think that's really what it boils down to.
You know, you said something early in the podcast that's like, if everything were really perfect and good and you got everything, then it would become boring. So I had to be if you look at it in that context, like, you know, where we come here, it's almost like all of us were like super bored and we were just like, hey, let's go and get a bunch of pain because this sounds like a really good idea, right? And if that is the case, man, I guess the levels of boredom were so extreme that I had to go through all of this pain because it's been brutal. But I mean, again, I always have to check myself and say that the wisdom doesn't come without the pain. And this podcast would never have been born if I didn't go through the pain. And I wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't be living where I'm living. I wouldn't be a coach if I didn't go through all the pain. So when I look all of that in context, even though I really don't like to admit it, I think that it served its purpose. And, you know, I am doing something that I really, really love to do. I'm helping people all over the world, either through coaching or through the podcast and through other means. And, you know, I feel really proud of myself for doing that. But without the pain, none of this would never been possible. And sometimes I ask myself, before I go to bed, I like, really, Todd, you really did yourself a good one there, where you put yourself through all of this to come here. And, you know, when I get up every morning and I know that I have podcasts doing stuff, I'm excited. I feel like a kid. So I guess, yeah, you know, it was all worth it, you know? So people, I think Brian has just concurred with everything I said, where you have to have the pain. And this is why I tell people, if you're still in your comfort zone and you're still resisting, try to do it without the pain. But the more you resist, the longer it persists and the more it hurts. So you're going to have a choice. Or in my case, I didn't have a choice. It was forced upon me that it was either break or be broken. So I chose to break and not be broken. So, you know. So anyway, with that being said, Brian, you know, please tell the lovely people at the Conscious Man 7 where they can find you, if they want to work with you, if you have any workshops where they can get your books, anything you want to plug, and all of that great stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. The last thing I wanted to say was just, I think this quote will sum things up nicely. It comes from Friedrich Nietzsche, and he says, to live is to suffer. To survive is to find meaning in the suffering. I'll leave folks with that. I think it caps off the conversation nicely. And I will say your triad of pain, lesson, wisdom, put it on a t-shirt. I want to buy that.
Thank you very much. I actually am going to do that.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah. To find me, just head to getoutofyourhead.com. There's links to my books and blog and all that stuff on the website. Social media, you can find me at Get Out of Your Head. Same handle, same spelling, all that. No dashes, no underscores. Please reach out if you feel like you have something to share. I love connecting with listeners and readers and all of that. And to folks who are in the middle of the struggle right now, please just know that things can get better. They usually do. So you're looking for your own metamorphosis, and I hope that it comes soon.
Yes, definitely. And guys, you know, with Christmas coming up, we're about to enter the season of gluttony, which means that you're about to put on another 3 to 5 kilos of fat. So if you would like to avoid that, seasonal weight gain and come to regret it in January, I can help you to get into shape because I help spiritually inclined people burn fat and build muscle. So if you would like to go on an epic fitness journey, you would like to grow mentally, physically, and spiritually, hit me up on my Instagram at Adriano_246 or my name Todd Cave on Facebook. Send me a message and let's see if you're a good fit for the Compound Body Training Army. And if you are on a spiritual journey or you would like to start a spiritual journey and you would like some help moving some fears and traumas, I can help you to get some magic mushrooms. So hit me up on my socials at Adriano_246 or my name Todd Cave on Facebook, and I can help you on your spiritual journey and get some magic mushrooms. So it was funny that you talk about t-shirts because I actually do have a merch store, and it is called Todd and Me on Amazon. So we have some cool tank tops, hoodies, shirts, and sweats. Link will be in the description of this podcast. And today I have on one of the Todd and Me shirts.
Sweet.
So if you would like to grab yourself a Todd and Me shirt, join the Conscious Man 7 community. And your support also helps this podcast to grow because it helps us out with things like editing and to spend time researching great guests like Brian. So head over to our Amazon store. Link will be in the description of this podcast. If you do get yourself a shirt, you can take a picture of yourself in a shirt. You can either tag me on social media and or email me or send me a DM with you. I will either tag you in my story and or show you in an upcoming podcast. And if you also would like to support us, but none of those things resonate with you, but you also don't really like ads and you listen on the podcast platforms, you can be a Patreon or Locals member. So you will get early releases to all of our podcasts. You will get direct access to me. You can ask me questions and stuff, and you will get fast responses from me because you will get priority over all the other messages that I get because I get several per day. So if you would like to also help us out with the podcast and you don't want a shirt, you don't want to train, and you don't want to do any spiritual journey, just think about becoming a Patreon or a Locals member. You get all ad-free podcasts, and you will help us on this journey and growing the podcast because our journey here is to make the Conscious Man 7 a consciousness library that has all of the best minds on the planet Earth. And this will be a podcast where people who want to learn stuff will be coming here, and we are building something great and amazing here. So if today's episode woke something up in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this with the man who's been quiet lately. That man who looks fine but isn't. Healing spreads when we talk about it. And if you're ready to dive deeper, check out Brian's books, Get Out of Your Head, and start taking your power back, one thought at a time. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and join our growing community at the Conscious Man 7 podcast. Remember, consciousness spreads the more we live it. Let's evolve together. This has been another episode of the Conscious Man 7 podcast, where we have conversations that go deeper than the average podcast in our quest to get out of our heads and break the mental prison. Brian, thanks again for being a guest on the Conscious Man 7 podcast. It was a really awesome conversation that we had, and I can't wait to publish this episode, to be honest, because I think that we are going to add great value to people. Until the next time, folks, stay conscious, stay connected, get out of your head, and come out of your comfort zone to break the mental prison that you created. Keep smiling, keep shining, and keep being the change you want to see. Speak to you soon. Cheers and namaste.